Hey gang, Shane Patrick White here, and welcome to Beyond the Process. Today I've set out the almost impossible task of inking a drawing by legendary artist Frank Frazetta. Now, Frank is inked in a variety of styles, and I'm going to choose one of those styles to ink in. So succeed or fail, at least I'll have learned something along the way. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the process. Frank Frazetta is known the world over for his paintings, but he was also an amazing black and white artist who worked in several different styles throughout his career. He originally learned how to use ink like his early mentor, Roy G. Krankel. It was a time when pen and ink work was more commonly published. I'm using a Winsor & Newton Series 7 No. 2 watercolor brush. I'll also use Speedball Super Black ink. Today I'll be inking this drawing that Frank had done of what looks like a Mongolian barbarian going up against a monster. I always try and take the brush for a spin to see how it's behaving before moving on to the final page. This helps me understand the firmness of the bristles and how dry the ink is. If needed, I'll squirt a little Windex into the ink to thin it without breaking it down like water does. For this piece, I printed it in blue line on 11x17 smooth Bristol. By the way, the blue tape on the brush is to buffer and bulk up the metal ferrule so that it doesn't hurt my finger as much. I like to start inking in a nondescript area away from the main focus of the art to get a handle on things. This allows me to calm my nerves, feel out the brush, and start down the path of understanding the person I'm inking. Once I'm comfortable with that, I'll test out secondary areas. Anytime I have too much ink on my brush, I tend to roll the brush in an area of spotted black, so as not to waste ink. This helps keep the point of the brush so that I can ink finer detail. As I made my way through this, I realized I was doing it all wrong, like literally from the get-go. I wondered why I wasn't more nervous about inking this piece. It's because instead of inking the drawing, I was inking it like a comic book. I didn't even have the drawing next to me for reference. I was trusting that whatever was in the blue line would be easy to translate. You can see by the flattening of the black areas how wrong I was. So let's start this the right way. I grab my iPad and keep it close at hand to see how Frank modeled the light around the form. The style is more reminiscent of Frank's later work in 1975, where he used larger areas of black and not as many classic strokes like the illustrators of old. It's probably better to go about this using dry brush so as to get the more subtle changes in the shadows. Another thing I noticed is I didn't like the No. 2 brush, so I went out on a limb and broke open a new No. 3 Winsor & Newton Series 7. You'll notice it holds more ink, and you can pull longer lines because the bristles are longer and more forgiving. I don't typically like to use new brushes right out of the package, as they are a little different and you have to find the characteristics of those brushes. Since this is my second go-around, I'm already warmed up and want to jump right into the good stuff. This will help me navigate how the brush handles and how much ink I need to use to get the dry brush effect to work on smooth paper. Frank has a lot of different types of textures to play with, from fur loincloths to stout bristle like fur to hair and skin. This variety will give me a better idea of how Frank worked. Ultimately, it's up to me to interpret these textures clearly and yet make it feel like it's from the same artist. I've always said the penciler is the liar, and the inker makes the world believe it's true. This creature's face is just gorgeous. It's important for me not to miss any of the subtlety that Frank creates. His halftone drawing has a lot of depth, which I really need to make look and feel right, but more importantly, make it look effortless. Time, consistent output, and perseverance will help in this pursuit. The key thing when inking anyone is that you need to listen to the conversation that is happening. Frank is telling me how he feels about certain areas of the piece through his pencils, through the detail and shading. It's important for me to add to that conversation, to not take it in a wholly new direction. That's how synergy between penciler and inker is formed. That's the difference between a hired gun and someone who's developed a working relationship. Inking Frank requires a light touch. You have to tickle the page, as it were, to not be so heavy-handed with the brush. His work is surprisingly a mix of delicate line and shading as well as powerful shapes. That's what makes his work unique. He may not always get the drawing 100%, but as long as he has that balance, you can't help but feel what Frank wants you to feel. Illustrator Harvey Dunn had a great quote: "It's better to have painted the thing with passion and emotion than to have painted it correctly." That's not to say we should eschew solid drawing fundamentals. Solid draftsmen make for great inkers because they're not tracing the work. They're enhancing the experience and helping the penciler sell the idea. Inking a creature can be more forgiving than inking a human being. Even though anatomy can be similar, they have many common elements that suspend disbelief. This human warrior, for instance, is grounded in what looks to be a Mongolian culture. This, in turn, is more likely to connect us with his plight. Frank understood the power of story in his work. By contrasting known and unknown worlds, he gave us a glimpse into a world that was fantastical. Having strong ideas and delivering powerful images is what draws us into his work. The challenge for me is to not get in the way of this, to almost become invisible in my execution. Any misstep could draw attention away from what Frank was intending. I've always liked the way Frank rendered hair. He had the wherewithal to create a strong organic shape so that it read well from a distance. The thing about inking that many people may not know is that the more artists you ink and the more you ink, the more you learn. The problem solving that happens by a variety of artists gets soaked up into your subconscious and offers you choices when approaching your own work. Instead of having one way to render something, I now have many ways, depending on what the work calls for. Granted, sometimes there are too many choices. In that way, you should probably give yourself a break and pencil and ink from real life. This is a great way to reset your own personal style. Painters used to do a thing called master copies, where they would paint, stroke for stroke, and use the same color palette as the artist they admired or wanted to study from. In my travels in Europe, I saw this many times in the various museums I visited. Some inkers will do a master copy over an already inked drawing. This is also a great way to learn how other people ink. I myself have not tried this, but it is on my bucket list. Inking body hair for me has always been fun, whether it's straight or curly or both. Finding the rhythm of line and balance of visual noise can be very pleasing to the eye. I have to admit, I'm not a fan of the warrior in this piece. It's not Frank's strongest figure. It has me conflicted because I don't know a way to make it better without pulling away from what is drawn. You will run into this time and again. Fundamental problems will crop up, and you'll have to ask yourself, can I make the change authentic to the artist's voice? If not, then you need to do the best you can and let it go. If you've worked with someone for a while, you may have built up a relationship where you can make such a change, and it will possibly go unnoticed because the end results are what the audience has grown used to, meaning the chemistry between penciler and inker has become one. Sometimes there is an opportunity to suggest elements fading away in the light. This can be achieved by thinner lines and even spacing the lines further apart. It's great for when you're inking something overwhelmed by light or diffused in dust and smoke. Not every line has to be inked. You will have to learn to make those judgment calls as to what strengthens the piece best. Outliers like Frank, who have done more illustration than comics, has only had a few inkers along the way. And honestly, I wish I had been one of them. The more I continued inking, the more I realized I wanted to ink more of Frank's work. I wanted to get down how Frank used light and to see if I could make it even better. In the end, I think it turned out better the second time around, and sometimes that's what it takes to ink a master like Frank Frazetta. Thanks again for joining me today. If you found any value in this, hit the like button. Better yet, subscribe or tell a friend. Until next time, thanks for watching.